Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best Book Club. I'm your host, NeufAtora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing the first-person perspective. With me, I have JCCW. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, it's just as for anybody listening, this will be a little bit of an odd one. Don't go with Xfinity. It's their customer service is horrible. But I guess just diving right into it, when I really sit down and think about it, first person seems to be the least used of all three perspectives. Third person is far and away the most popular perspective to write in, and there was a boom of second person or POV stories as they've been weirdly and honestly, in my opinion, incorrectly labeled, since every character has a point of view and each perspective focuses on a different one. And really the difference for any who aren't sure of it is basically I, you, or them. That's really the difference between them, if you boil it down. And I guess the first story that comes to mind when I think of ones utilizing first person is Luckily Unlucky by Anti-Cherry. And first person was definitely a much more popular choice way back in the day, like on Lucky Fetish and Wedgie Girls and like in the past. With writers like Nicely Done, Anti-Cherry, like it was the big names back in the day. But there was a pretty rapid shift into third person. And so I guess I have two questions with this then. Are there any other examples that you can think of that have utilized first person really well? And then why do you think that we kind of have gravitated and shifted into third person so much?
Those are two great questions. So as somebody who started on DA and never got onto the Lucky Fetish forums, I can speak on the big names that used a lot of eye perspectives. Amy Wedgie, very popular back in the day, a classic. Nearly all of her stories were framed. Well, a lot of her most famous stories were under the first-person perspective. There was her Wedgie War in the Gym story. A lot of her walking home and getting a wedgie story. I believe her. No, that one wasn't one. But she utilized a lot of them, and as to speaking to their effectiveness, going back and reading them now, they are certainly not the caliber of story that you would expect nowadays. But that's because it was 2013. You know, no one really knew what the standard was in the fetish. You just sort of said your stuff, and for what Amy Wedgie did, it wasn't like too bad. It got her right. You immediately knew what was going on in the story. You got right into her mindset, and at least for her, she was consistent amongst all of her eye stories. That was clearly the same character the entire time. Maybe it was her actual stories, like her IRL stories, but that assumes that any true story is real.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
For other eye stories, there have been a couple. That I really enjoy. One of my favorite stories of all time is First Person Wedgie Truth or Dare by Girl-Wedgies on DeviantArt. A really old story. This was back in 2015, but it's entirely in the eye perspective where a guy and his friend play Truth or Dare with each other, and eventually he gets to give her a wedgie. And there's just something about how he describes it in the eye perspective that I absolutely love. Like, it encapsulates the feeling of somebody who's getting to see this girl get a wedgie, like the excitement that you feel when it happens. He encapsulates it perfectly, and I don't think this would have worked in any other perspective except for I don't think it would have worked as well in any other perspective except the eye. It's just that good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very interesting if you start to look at stories of like, how would it change if it was a different perspective? And I mean, 2013, that was before you get things like Lucy and Daniela, Two Worlds, Friend Sessions, Hannah and Sarah, like all these classic stories none of them existed at that point. I mean, you have like sort of the outliers, like Luckily Unlucky, Sore Winner, all the Nicely Done's work. Like all you had those couple of stories, but for the most part, it was still uh, just sort of people getting all their stuff out there, as you said, and so there really wasn't even a standard to look to. Um, so it is really cool to now be able to, I guess, sort of look at all these stories in hindsight and see what was accomplished and really or I guess what set the standard.
Yeah, and I think this sort of leads into what your second question was, like, what about the shift into third person? I think that third person has always been around, but I think what really pushed it over the edge was everything happening over on Lucky Fetish, which unfortunately means that I missed it. I can only comment on how third person was on DA, probably around that time, and it was mostly relegated to fanfiction stories. You have your Cisettas, you have your can't believe I'm blanking on the name. Magni's. You're used to be as Magni, now Magni Poles.
Yes.
But they all focused on sort of fan fiction stories, taking established characters and putting them into wedgie stories, and the effect of the effect of that. There really wasn't any like sort of special thing third person point of view brought to that. It was more or less just, like, how do you what are you supposed to do? Put the reader into the perspective of like Hinata. I mean, I'm pretty sure some people would actually really like that. Damn, that's a good idea. but like there wasn't like most writers didn't really like make their own stuff. OCs were generally relegated to Amy Wedgie and drawings, basically. There weren't that many like deep there weren't any stories like Luckily Unlucky. Like there was nothing of that quality. Like it was a shock to me when I discovered Han Gutherson's DeviantArt page, and I was like, "Whoa, where'd all this stuff come from? This is awesome!" And then I realized so much later that I was missing out on it for years.
Yeah, there's just so much good stuff to go back to, and it's that's why I love talking about all of it. It's so much fun. Um, I really like. I guess like looking at things like atmosphere and structure. Perspective really is one of the aspects of writing that doesn't seem to get much conversation around it in the community. Yet it can wildly change up the tone and feeling a story conveys depending on how you use it and which perspective you choose to go with.
It really does. There's a reason that used stories are just so much more impactful because, at least the way that I've written my used stories, I take it from the perspective. I still take it as a perspective that I'm the force that's hitting the person, basically, or I guess in this case, wedging the person. Like I want to make every single moment impact that character, which is sort of like a dungeon master point of view. Like you want to like impact your players by like showing them or like doing something that's like really impactful. And I sort of wanted to do that with the you stories, make it sound like every single thing that the you person does is actually impactful to what's going on. And I'm not sure if it is that like impact feel that makes them so popular. It could be. All I know is that they are just that popular. All of my most popular stories are you stories.
Yeah, and it seems like second person's. It's hard to say whether first or second is sort of the lesser used of the two, especially given how popular second person stories are.
I'd probably say that first is because first person is not really used all that much for fictional stories. At least for nowadays, a lot of stories are that are told in first person are put into the true story section of the Lucky Fetish, but nothing.
Hmm.
But there's really nothing. Um, like there's really no stories out there, like, or at least that I've been trying to find, that really have the first person perspective. Like they're really uncommon.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if a portion of that is just that writing in first person is sort of the most intimate and personal perspective you can write in. Like you sort of have to um, insert yourself more when you're writing from that perspective. It's like inevitable that you will, because in some ways you are writing about yourself. You're like, if you really want to write if you want if you want the writing to come across as genuine and just well written in general, um, you have to you have to sort of get into the story. I'm not explaining the thought very well. um, I because it's all you're it's as though you actually are the person in it and you are experiencing everything, rather than you're looking on as an outsider, uh, and you're seeing everything happen, or you're being told this is what's happening to you. Like you are actually experiencing this. Like that, those, I guess the same way that you see and experience second person, that's how I see first person, really.
I mean, that's a way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like a shortcut in some ways of like it potentially provides an easier avenue for readers to
Almost a
engage with the characters more.
Yeah, like, I mean, that's sort of why. I mean, that's the exact reason that I gave a shout out to that one to Truth or Dare wedgies, was just because I got really deep into that, and thanks to the eye perspective, it's almost like I set myself into that story.
Yeah, you essentially become that character. It's really cool. It's fun to experience that, and it's a shame that we really don't have anybody trying to write in that perspective at the moment. At least none that we're aware of. But
Yeah, may,
it's
new writers, please do this. But I do find it fascinating that there isn't more, like, especially because a lot of writers probably grew up reading some similar literature that I read, like Percy Jackson, which is entirely in the first person. Like
mhm.
the theory would be that because they read stuff in a similar perspective, they must have gotten inspired by it, and therefore started writing it themselves. Which I find it interesting that no one really has done it. I'm not sure if it's like. Do you think that there's like a knee jerk reaction to write in the third person point of view and not the first person point of view, that you actually have to try for that one?
Hmm. I think part of it might come down to people not automatically seeing the characters that they are putting on the page as parts of themselves. You're going to, there's kind of no way around putting a piece of yourself in whatever you write. Uh, and so I wonder if people are maybe subconsciously avoiding exposing themselves to any degree as much as they can. I wonder if that's a little bit of it.
You know, yeah, I can agree on that. Honestly, thinking back on it, I never really like some of my earlier stories. I never really took the characters I was writing as almost like extensions of myself. Um, it more came more so, I was just writing because I felt like it. Like I wanted to take these. I just wanted to do things with these characters. Like I never really got that it was like almost me exploring myself. But now that I'm like looking through, I can almost see like maybe that's why I like the U stories a lot. It's because I started getting into Dungeons and Dragons around that time, around the time I wrote my first one. So it was almost like I'm almost like making my own story here, or like I'm like making someone else experience the story that I get to give them.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it
Yeah, it's
makes me curious on how I
you.
would like go about writing about writing a first person story, because
Yeah.
like how would I make how would I go about that? Like create a whole fictional story with a first person point of view. Um, I mean, you could probably do it almost like VR, where like you put yourself in the midst of a game, or maybe like an Elder Scrolls game or Fallout, where your character is sort of almost a blank slate, but with
Mhm.
like little personality sprinkled in. But what makes the story is all the characters around you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're almost asking people to uh, accept that this is who they are, rather than it's the story of someone else. It becomes the story of you, and like it becomes the story of I, really, of this is what I am experiencing. This is me. It could be a little bit of fear that it might not be pulled off properly, and people are like, well, I mean, this is not what I would do. This is not. I'm not this person. This is. So I wonder if that might be a little bit of it as well.
That could be. I just remembered that I can't. Somehow I haven't favorited this story because I can't find it. It's a crime. It should have definitely been favorited. A while back ago on DA, there was a amazing story that was basically like a choose your own adventure story, and it was entirely in the I perspective, where it's like um, almost like you're in the locker room changing. Do you decide to undress in front of everybody, or go into the bathroom and undress and change there? You get shoved in the locker room. Do you cut? You get shoved into the girls' locker room. Do you pound on the door, or do you immediately hide? Stuff like that. And it was a really good story, like a really good, like fun story, entirely in the first person perspective. That's a story that could have never been done in another perspective. And I mean, that's probably one of the best avenues for a first person perspective to go down, is the choose your own adventure type of story, where, as you said, it's entirely on like putting the person into their own story. Um, almost like they get to almost like they get to decide, is that really me or is it not? Like choose your own adventure is perfect for that.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. That's. I love that. Like they go hand in hand. Like especially given the nature of choose your own adventure stories. Like yeah, you're creating your own adventure. Like it makes it even. I've never seen another choose your own adventure story that like it's in the first perspective. It's always third person. You're choosing what someone else does, but here like that would be perfect. Of you're actually choosing what you experience, what you do. That would be great. If you think of what that story is, if you can find it again, definitely send it my way, and I'll share it around.
Yeah, I'm probably I'm so I gotta find it, man. Now I'm really curious. I'm wondering where the hell it is. um, but as I try and find this thing, do you have any other questions?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Sweet.
So we touched on this to a little small degree. What ways do you think that first person can boost the story where second and third can't?
Yeah, we did sort of touch on that a little bit. I think your answer on I think your answer on whether making the person at making the reader actually question like whether or not they would actually do this. Is this really I in this story, or is this just some or is this or no, this isn't me at all.
Hmm.
That's sort of I think the biggest advantage on the first person perspective, um, because the you perspective immediately like throws the reader into like, oh, something's happening to me, so immediately gets them
Hmm.
hooked. And the third person, it's you get to experience other characters, like that's the big hook. The first person should almost be sort of a should almost be like a you get to immerse yourself in this. Do you like this or not? That's sort of like what the hook should be. Um, I think there are.
Yeah,
I
it's
think first person perspective also has the benefit of it has stories that really can't be told. Um, any other that really can't be told. Um, in any other perspective. Like if you tried to fit, like if you tried to take a third person story, you could easily fit it into into a first person story. But a first person story doesn't necessarily fit into a third person without radically changing how the story needs to be written. So I think that's another.
I
I think that's another advantage of first person. Sorry.
I I I do have to disagree with you a little bit on that last point. With so many third person stories, they focus on multiple different characters and their thought. Like you have uh, multiple different forms of each perspective, and like with third person, you have things like third person limited, third person omniscient, things like that. So if you have like a third person omniscient perspective, you're able to get into the minds of every character. So if you have that, it definitely becomes quite a task if you're trying to translate that to a first person. I mean, there are plenty of novels that I can think of that that sort of balance the two in a way. Like one chapter focuses on one character, and then another chapter focuses on another. So in that way, it kind of blends the perspectives to some degree. Uh, but yeah, I guess in general, trying to translate on one story to another not only is just a fun exercise of like I guess it sort of flexes your creative muscles, but it's quite a challenge in a lot of aspects because yeah, like as you said, you kind of have to overhaul the story majorly if it's still going to make sense.
Yeah, like I think about Harry Potter as a good example. Because
Yes.
J.K. Rowling tends to show other characters' emotions through like quick little blurbs of like something happens and Harry sees Hermione giggle. Like you can tell that she thought it was funny or humorous. Like that, and that's how she balances conveying other people's emotions in a third person story, almost like a first person story, which I find is very interesting. Like that's sort of how you would have to convey it in a first person story if you want to convey other character emotions. At least
Hmm.
without having inner thoughts. The third person perspective
Yeah.
just allows you to explore that fully.
Right. And I think I believe Harry Potter, the whole series sort of falls under third person limited. So you get fully Harry's thought process and his ideas and what he thinks of everything. And you only get small portions of what everyone else thinks.
Yep, basically exactly how
So
it is.
yeah, it may be the closest to first person without actually getting into third person.
Yeah, that's
Um,
I'm
One
just gonna.
way that
Oh,
I think one regard that I think first person sort of has above the other two perspectives. I believe it engages readers the most, even more than second person, because you're not reading a story about someone else as an outsider or being told this is what you're experiencing. I am the person in the story, and everything is actually happening to me. It's sort of like the illusion of choice, in a sense of like you're almost giving consent of like, yeah, I'm agreeing this is happening to me. Nobody's telling me this is happening to me. I'm not seeing what's happening to someone else. I'm going along with this is happening to me.
Ooh, yeah, that's actually a really good that's actually a really good way to put the difference between you and second and first person point of view, because that's exactly how it is. With the I story, that's why that's why choose your own adventures are really good for I stories, because you actually do get that choice. You actually get to see the decisions you make. But you
Mhm.
for stuff like you stories, like the story is just that. There's no like there's no like fat in between. All you're getting is exactly what that you story is telling you you're getting. Like, you just get that
Yeah.
one experience, which for some people that's all they need. And I think for fetish stories, that's actually a really good avenue to do it, because, well, that's all they need. It's just a few wedgies. Um,
Hmm.
but but for first person, that would be really interesting to like almost see if somebody does take that illusion of choice. Almost like having a story where, like, as it goes along, it almost looks like the character is just making constant different decisions. And as you go along and you're reading this, you're like, oh, I probably would have done that decision a little differently. What would have happened if I had done the decision previously? Almost getting you
Yeah.
to think, like, would you make the same moral choices as the characters in the story?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That was something I was thinking of as well. Like, if especially if it's not a choose your own adventure story, you're sort of like you're thinking like you could run into something that happens of like it. Would I really do that? Is this really something I would do? Yeah.
Oh, hold on a second.
What's that?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have been sitting on a story for a long time. Big shock for me. But I've been sitting on a story concept for a long time, and I've almost got it. Like, I had it figured out for the longest time, and I was actually getting really excited about it. Um, but I stopped when I realized that, it just wasn't hitting right. Like, it just constantly felt like what was going on was just like, it felt ugly for me.
Mhm.
But now that I'm starting to think about it, I think the first person perspective would actually really benefit this story because of the moral choices. Like, this is a guy sort of like going about his day, curious about a topic, and the individual choices that he makes could be like, I like wondering, would I make the same choices? And
Yeah.
it could make for a very fascinating story, wondering what are the possibilities, like making you constantly wonder what were the possibilities if I had chosen this one, or what would be the possibilities if I had chosen that one.
Yeah. This is that's quite another that's a whole other topic. Oh, we're gonna get into that now. It's choice. Oh.
Because
Yeah.
um, I don't know if I should I tell this, should I say what the basic story is?
Well, that's entirely up to you. Do you wanna give people a teaser? Do you wanna get people looking forward to something?
Maybe. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll do it because I think this could be an interesting way to continue discussion. So my story is titled "Whale Tails versus Wedgies," and it's a story about a wedgie fetishist who is just sitting eating breakfast one day when he wonders, you know what, fuck, which one is better? Which one do I enjoy more? And this one is a personal thing for me because I love both. So this would
Mhm.
be a story basically designed around me. But
Okay.
I've thought this question before, which is what exactly spawned this one. It's like, man, which one do I actually enjoy more? And throughout his day, he encounters multiple different instances of whale tails, and he wonders if I get, and he wonders if I, what would be better if I just kept it like that, she's unaware, or if I give her a wedgie and I let her know, hey, her underwear's showing. You know, little tease.
Well,
Like
isn't he a lucky motherfucker?
that would be a, yeah, he'd be a lucky motherfucker, definitely. But that could be a nice little. But I think it could be a nice little moral, nice little dilemma. Because think about it. Like, what if he chooses to, like, in all the scenarios that, think about all the scenarios that he could get involved in where he sees a whale tail, and what if he decides to do a wedgie? What if it's in an inappropriate scenario? Like, what about all the context of
Hmm.
everything? Like, I find it can be very fascinating. Um, but the reason that
Absolutely.
I haven't done this, that I haven't even touched this story in months, is because while I was writing it, this I just I just felt like this wasn't right. Like I felt like I was writing this in the third person point of view, and this just did not work for me. I was like, man, this stinks. Like this feels wrong. It feels like this feels like whatever this third person character is just a dick. Like I
Yeah.
don't feel like this is right.
Yeah. You're.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
did, and I wanted to, and I wanted to avoid that. But you know what? I think that this can actually work kind of well as a first person, because then you start getting the moral dilemma.
Yeah. And I feel it might even highlight the which choice you make even more. So people are thinking on the possibility, like, what if he had gone the other way? What if he hadn't done that? What if he'd done this instead? People are people might be wondering more. That little bit more engagement, even, I think.
Yeah, I think it honestly would. I think it could drive up a ton of engagement because a lot of people could read it and sort of draw their own like their own answers on some of this. It's like, what would they have done?
Hmm. Yeah,
Although
but
if
it can
I,
also be a lot of fun
it could
to
be.
go to write out some of those choices the other way.
Yeah.
It could be fun to do that.
Hmm.
Now,
Got
the
ideas.
thing you brought up was that it feeds directly into my point before of like if you go into first person, you're almost it's almost inevitable that you're going to put more of yourself into the story. Like it sounds like that it's a story about a major question that you have.
Yeah, it's
It
like
it's going to come across as more genuine, more honest.
it's almost like it's almost like I almost like came up with this question as a evolution of my own like fetish because when I was younger, hated thongs. I hated it. I didn't think they were sexy at all. I didn't get it. But as I have grown up, I have grown to absolutely love them. So, so it's almost like an evolution of that. It's like what what I used to love a lot and what I love now, almost like a back and forth. And maybe some other people in the community have felt the same way, and like they would like to see it, and there would be like a cool story that almost explores that. Like, wow, my tastes are really evolving. Like,
Yeah,
but I still love my original. So it's like there's a, I don't know which one which one's better.
yeah. That's you could very easily bring into the whole thing then a question of what what do you lose as you grow older and your chase you can focus on loss to some degree, I think, if you go in that direction.
Yeah, that's a ooh, that's good. Yeah, that's a good. That's a good way to put it. I feel like if I go down the story, eventually I'm gonna have to come to a conclusion of like loss of something, because there clearly is a loss of something, but exploring that, like, that gets deep, man. Well, I mean, hey,
Hmm.
maybe we just need some deep. Maybe we need some deep shit. We
Absolutely.
need
That's
some deep shit in the community.
yes, that's the kind of stuff I like reading the most. Stuff that makes me think, makes me question myself and examine myself. That's what I think is some of the best media out there. Is the media that, while you're looking at it and trying to figure it out, it's figuring you out and it's telling you if you need to look at yourself, or it's giving you something about yourself that you weren't aware of. Like, I love when media can do that. And one thing, one minimal way, tiny way that I think first person works better than second and third in some instances, it kind of makes writing easier in some respects, where you don't necessarily have to worry about whether you're using characters' names or too much or not enough. Just tiny little things like that can make it easier, because it's not jarring or weird to just constantly say I, because you're writing from that person's perspective. So it could make it a little bit easier, just as so you're not. Maybe can read a little cleaner, a little smoother.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I got struck with an idea, and I had to just create some to Google Docs for later.
okay.
But so I'm sorry I missed that last part.
Oh, so I think in a minimal way, one way that first person sort of goes above second and third is that it kind of makes writing easier in some respects, where you don't necessarily have to worry about whether you're using characters' names too much or too little. Like, it can read a little smoother and cleaner, as opposed to, do I have to? Did I use the character's name too much? Or, like, do I have to use pronouns here? Um, it kind of takes a little bit of that work away.
Oh, that would definitely take away a lot of that work, because I is such a great word to use, man. Uh,
Hmm.
like you don't gotta like with I, you don't gotta like with I, you don't gotta worry about like using your own pronouns in there, because you just say I, me, my. It's so easy,
Hmm.
and it's just a short one syllable word. It's perfect.
Hmm. Something that I just thought of. I wonder if it also makes writers think about what really makes sense for a character, like what their real characterization looks like.
Yeah, cause
It,
like
I, can,
cause like
I think it can be
if you're look
easy
if
to.
sorry, it,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
it's like looking from the outside in is how the best I can describe it. Um,
Hmm.
almost like you're looking through a window at every other person, and as you're looking at them, you start to notice their little consistencies, like, hey, they like to do this, or they tend to like adjust their glasses often, or maybe they have a tell to show that they're nervous. Like, you get a lot more characterization like that in the first person point of view, because your own character, because the I character, you don't really need a lot for them. You just maybe like a few basic things, like maybe you have them pick up, or maybe you have them pick up a couple comic books as they're cleaning their room. Like to show that they're into that stuff. But
Hmm.
it just has to be minimal stuff to sort of like show where your character stands in comparison to everyone else. But everybody else gets a lot more focus. You don't need you because you don't need a lot of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, you also have the option to really dive deeply into the protagonist, the character that this perspective is coming from. Like, I think the story that I think does first person perspective the best in the community is "Feeling the Fire Until It Burns" by Nicely Done, because you're already in the mind of that character. You already are that character. And so it's just a natural step forwards to then you can explore that character's mind and like fully go through their thought processes and how they view the world, as opposed to third person. You have, or second, like I guess, especially third, like you're looking at all of these characters equally. So why are you focusing on one as opposed to another?
That's a good way of thinking about it. I don't have a story in mind. I don't have a fetish story in mind, but Persona 5 is what I'm constantly imagining, because you have a
Yeah.
silent protagonist in a RPG. They speak maybe 5 lines in the entire game, the entire 120-hour game. But the strength of that game comes from all the characters that the protagonist interacts with. You get to see, how they grow out of their shell and work their way up to going out on their own after being stuck inside for years. You get to see how, um, you get to see the little conflicts of like past relationships, or like past mistakes made by each character. Um, you get to just explore everybody else so much more because the protagonist is so silent. And even then, because the protagonist is silent, the small little things that they do make their character just so much more. Because the character of Joker in Persona 5 is a massive dork, and like a man goes and play. Man literally buys retro games just to play them on his own time. Like, he's a massive dork. Um, like that's what I imagine. That's what I think is like first person perspective personified. Pardon the pun.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I think I think that so yeah, that's I think what one definitely your idea of how the first person perspective enhances the other characters. I think that's definitely true.
For sure. Yeah, I think what our this the conversation we're having right now is really also highlighting what we're looking for to some degree from first person. It sounds like you really love that uh, you can focus so much on other characters because the first person, the perspective of the character that's being focused on, um, is experiencing everybody else like an actual person. And I love when first person can dive deeply into that person themselves rather than everybody else, which is fantastic. I love that we're able to get. I love that we're able to go after such different things on the same perspective. It's fantastic.
Yeah, like it's a. I mean, that's the beauty of stories and well, writing them. It's that we both. It's that eventually you start developing how you would like interpret other stories.
For
Um,
sure.
I mean, right now, like my like just talking about this is getting my inspiration up. So,
That's awesome. Well, I love to hear that.
I'm yeah the two Google Doc things that I made. I took that story that I had, and I'm splitting it into two
Okay.
because I thought it would be really interesting that way. There would
Hmm.
you'd have to read it though in order to see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got me very intrigued.
But
Hmm.
do you have any other questions?
Yeah. Actually, the inverse of the question I just asked of are there any ways in which first person doesn't quite work where the other two do?
I always thought that first person perspective, like it does allow for like a little bit of characterization in the other characters, but I do find that being able to think in the other, not being able to think in the other characters' minds is really limiting for me personally. because as I write in like you perspectives, I tend to just think about like what the other characters are on a baser level. I find myself not really focusing on, you know, what are their motivations, like what are they like,
Mhm.
what's the context of what they're doing right now. I tend to forget that because I'm
Yeah.
constantly focusing on what the you perspective needs to be. Um,
Hmm.
so I think
That's
that could
interesting.
be a weakness of it, at least from a writing perspective.
For sure. But I think in some ways it can also be seen as a strength because then if you're with that, if you're not given that information of like how the other characters are thinking, how they feel about things, then you're wondering about it and your engagement is increased because of that. You're thinking more about the story than like long past when you've read it.
You know what? That's actually a good point.
Yeah.
That is true. It could be either way. I think if it's done well, you'll be engaged. If it's not done
For
well,
sure.
which I'm always worried if it's done well or not. So that's probably why I thought of that immediately.
Yeah. Are there any examples you can think of that of stories that don't do it very well? I can't
Well,
think
I
of
mean,
any
it's hard because
except
there's
the
not.
terrible.
I know that's a terrible question. Like
No, 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 not the that.
on a moral level, but I just because there's just not many. Like I can't really think of any off the top of my
Right.
head that are done. Like it's hard for me to think of ones that were done well off the top of my head, let alone the ones that were done bad off
Um.
the top of my head. Um,
Yeah. I'm
um,
here's
yeah,
you might agree with this then of all of uh, most of the true stories that have
uh,
been posted of
oh
either
yeah,
when if they are true, they're not really written very well. So you're like all so many of the details that we want are not written out, and then like I saw these so obviously fake quote unquote true stories posted on Reddit
yeah.
yesterday, and like
It's like
they
guys, this is just so ridiculous. Like I find the worst true stories are the ones where it's they get to give it they get to give it multiple times and they play it off as something like really easy to do, and it's like no no, that's not how it works, man. You can't like if you have a wedgie fetish, you cannot be a Chad with it. I can guarantee that there is not a single Chad wedgie giver that is just like, oh yeah, I've given so many girls. Like, no, you haven't, man.
I could think of one. I could think of one. Senpai and Senpai versus Princess or whatever his actual name is now.
I mean, maybe
He
you
seems to
could.
be doing it a
I,
lot.
I mean, maybe you could call it a Chad move, but like, um, I think sort of but I think to sort of like there were a few when I was browsing the Lucky Fetish forums. There were a few true stories that I was just like rolling my eyes at. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, that definitely happened. There was like it was one of the earliest of the true stories that I found. It's like stories from I'm assuming an old user, where he told like there were like 10 stories, and as I kept reading them, I'm like, man, this is just getting so ridiculous. I'm betting that none of these fucking happened. I can almost guarantee it, especially because like there were perfect instances where other girls should have been referenced and weren't. There were a multitude of instances where people should have obviously been caught where wedgies were happening and weren't.
Mhm.
There were so many ways that wedgies shouldn't have happened and yet they did. I'm like, man, this just so does not happen, man. This is just so not true. I mean, the stories are kind of like they're written well, but they're just so obviously not true. And when you write them in true stories, or you put them in the true story section, I expect truth, and I'm not getting any of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the case with most true stories and that have been posted anywhere. Is you do have to take them with a grain of salt, but they can be enjoyable. nonetheless, of just if you view it as a fictional story, because yeah, like the things that happen in them are most of the time so obviously would not escalate that far. People would be stopped or they'd be caught or whatever. Like things would not go this well.
Yeah, I actually, there is one really good story in the true stories that I go back to all the time. It's I don't remember if it's titled "Friending College" or just "College Wedgies," but it's a story about a guy with his one friend from college, and the girl wears nothing but thongs. And there comes a point, and he describes one point in his third year where he would give her like wedgies almost daily, and it turned into a thing that she actually didn't mind all that much. Um, I have skepticism about that. Just
Mm-hmm.
on just on wow, that's really lucky that you got that. But I mean, luck can be luck happens. Like anything could.
Yep.
If it is true, it's
Yeah.
an amazing story. If it's not true, it's still pretty good. Like I still kind of like I still want to go back to that story and reread it some nights just because I like it a lot. I think
Yeah.
it's very well written. The eye perspective is actually used pretty well, to convey the eye person's like feelings about the whole thing. Um, I think it also adds the mystery to what was the girl really thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
it actually somebody actually asked that question on on that forum with the story, where they asked what did you think about it, and the guy shared a screenshot of a text where she said, yeah, it was a little weird, but I got used to it. Again, anything can be faked, but anything can also be true.
Yep.
But hey, he managed to garner intrigue in what the girl was thinking about with all these wedgies, and if you accomplish that with a first person story, I think that's a win.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you're thinking more about the story than what's actually there, that's success to me. I mean, you could say that luck is kind of intrinsic to this fetish when you look at the title, the name of the forum.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
uh,
That's very fair.
just a stupid joke. Man.
but it's but I but
Yeah,
yeah,
I,
that's
I
one
think,
example of a true story that I think was actually done really well, no matter if it's true or not.
yeah. I mean, I think in general, it really comes like where one perspective doesn't work and others do. I think it really just comes down to your ability and skill as a writer and like what really makes sense for the story. Like having an understanding of the identity of the story, what it should actually be. I think it really just comes down to that.
I agree. I agree on that.
Is there a perspective that you've generally gravitated towards in your writing?
Third, as I described with that one story, I immediately put it into the third person perspective, but not even
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what the perspective should be. I just got to sort of put it in there. Um,
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
aside from that, like when I was writing a lot of you stories, like there was just a part of me that really wanted to do that. But I think honestly that was because I saw how much engagement it was getting, how many favorites it got, and was like, "Fuck yes, I can't." Like I want to do more of this. Like I want to get that exposure, but. Like there was a but when I wrote my first you story, it was out of just a I want to do this scenario. Um, I think it was
Hmm.
also out of feelings of like being away for college and realizing that I'm all alone, um, all alone with just my wedgies. Um, but then I wanted, but then I saw like the engagement on that grow, and I'm like, oh shit, I think I can actually do this. So I just started more, and well, here we are now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't wrote any second person stories.
I'd recommend it.
Hmm.
It's very fun, honestly. It is
Yeah.
this is also coming from a dungeon master. I do enjoy writing the you stories because that's just how I talk in Dungeons and Dragons games. But it's
Right.
fun. Like I can't help it. I just like writing them. When I was writing my teacher you perspective story, like I was just having fun writing as the teacher. Like it, it was like, ooh, I get to make this person feel spunky and cool before they get a fucking massive wedgie.
Yeah.
Like that's just fun. Like
Very
it's
nice.
like a oh yeah, got you sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the
Oh,
you.
very
I
nice.
love writing the you perspective. I think it's probably my favorite perspective to write. Even though I gravitate more to the third person perspective, I enjoy writing the second perspective more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that might be an interesting question to dive into then of like why that is the sort of the gut reaction or the gut instinct to go towards as third as opposed to any other. Are there any ways that you can think of to keep first person perspective fresh and exciting to readers? I think we brought up a pretty big one of choose your own adventure stories, which are a massive undertaking. It's a huge amount of work.
Huge
So
amount of
are there
work.
perhaps any? Are there any that might be a little easier or more accessible to start with?
Um, Honestly, the true stories. But almost like
Mm,
writing a fictional story like a true story. Um, like write out a write out a bully scenario with an I. Um, like I entered into the locker room and then I got a wedgie, or I got to give a wedgie, if that's also your forte. Um,
yeah.
but I think start there. If you're a beginning writer and you are really interested in the first person perspective, start there because I think then you can start growing. You can sort of learn what the first person perspective, like its strengths and weaknesses. Like there's one thing to hear about the strengths and weaknesses. It's another thing to like feel it, to be like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think the only innovation we need on the first person stories is just more of them.
I agree.
Yeah, like we just need more of them. Like for those upcoming writers, there you go. There's your market. We're gonna read them. We want them.
Yeah. 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 It's they're there's just something about them that
It's just good, man. It's just
provides
fun.
something that the other two can't really. Well, that's very nice. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss?
I honestly don't have much else to comment on. Um, I already said everything that I want. To, like 5 seconds ago. Write some first person stories. Damn it.
Well, is there anything that you'd like to promote from yourself or others?
Um, just know that I have two stories that have just that have just come into my mind, and look out for them at the same time.
Very nice. Yeah, we have some. I love ending episodes like that. A little tease of something to look forward to. It's great. Well, thank you so much, JCCW, for coming on.
Thank you for having me, man. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun. If there's anything that you listeners like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as NeufAtora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.